This is the Chubby Chernobyl. It's the beefier cousin of the venerable Chernobyl ant. Big, super visible, it floats like a cork and works like a charm. For a hook, I'm going to use a Dai-Riki number 710 in size 8. Begin by getting the hook firmly secured in the jaws of your tying vise. For thread, I've loaded a bobbin with a spool of UTC 140 Denier in a color called olive green. Get your thread started on the hook shank, leaving a bit of space behind the eye, and take a few wraps rearward before snipping off the tag. For the abbreviated tail of the fly, snip 2 full-length strands of pearl Krystal Flash free from the hank. Fold the strands in half, then lay the midpoint of those folded strands on top of the hook shank at the tie-in point. Take a few wraps of tying thread, then sweep the strands rearward and begin taking wraps to continue binding the flash to the top of the shank. Go all the way to the start of the hook bend. You can then snip the Krystal Flash off, leaving a tail a little more than a hook gap in length. Using open spiral wraps, return your thread back up to the initial tie-in point. To add some bulk and maybe a bit of float to the body of the fly, I've cut a 1/4 inch wide strip of 2mm craft foam. The color isn't important as it'll be covered up later. Place one end of the strip on top of the hook shank at the tie-in point and take a few firm wraps of thread to lock it down. Reach for the super glue, here fly tire Z-men, and apply a thin coat to the top of the hook shank beneath the foam. This isn't absolutely essential, but helps to keep the foam from spinning around the shank. Make somewhat loose, open spiral wraps to bind the foam down. When you get to the base of the tail, tighten the wraps up to really lock the foam in place, which will allow you to simply pull the excess off. To cover the foam underbody, just about any type of dubbing will do. Here, I'm going to use yellow olive colored rabbit. I've pulled out a fairly ample pinch. Use the dubbing to create a thin 2-inch long noodle on your tying thread. Then take wraps with the noodle to begin covering up the underbody for a short distance up the hook shank. I'm going to use olive-colored 2mm fly foam for the top of the fly. Regular craft foam will work fine. I've cut the foam to shape using a specialized cutter from River Road Creations, but you can trim it roughly to the same shape just with scissors. The strip should be slightly more than a hook gap in width. Lay the foam on top of the hook shank so it extends a little ways beyond the hook bend. Pinch the foam and take a few wraps of tying thread to get it really locked down well. Don't worry about the number of thread wraps, these will be covered up later. Snip a single strand, approximately 4 inches long, of your favorite rubber leg material, free from the hank, and fold it in half. Then, locate the midpoint of the segment. Lay that midpoint against the near side of the hook at the location of your tying thread and take just 2 wraps to secure it. This will allow you to pull one of the strands over to the far side of the hook. At this stage of the game, it's better to leave the rubber leg loop intact. For the wings of the fly, I'm going to use gray McFlylon, but white and yellow are often used as well. Snip a full strand free from the hank, then cut one segment about 1.25 inches in length, and another that's about 2 inches long. Pick up the shorter segment and lay its midpoint on top of the foam and take thread wraps to bind it down. 2 or 3 wraps are all that's needed. Go back to the same dubbing as before, and again pull an ample pinch from the packet. Use it to make a short, slender noodle on your tying thread. Then sweep the wing rearward and take wraps with the noodle to hold it there. Once the wing's angled rearward, pull back on the foam and rubber legs and take a wrap or 2 with the noodle around the foam underbody. Go to the dubbing packet again, and this time pull out a substantial amount. Create a long, fairly thick dubbing noodle on your tying thread and use it to cover the foam underbody up to a point about 2 full eye lengths behind the back edge of the hook eye. Then pull the foam forward, give it a little pinch, and lock it down with nice tight wraps of tying thread. If you need to, pull the rubber leg loop back to keep it out of the way for the time being. Snip another length of rubber leg material free from the hank, and as before, fold it in half and identify the segment's midpoint. Tie in the material with 2 wraps of tying thread and separate it on either side of the fly. Pick up the longer segment of McFlylon you snipped earlier and lay its midpoint on top of the foam. Secure it with just a couple wraps of tying thread. Go to your dubbing packet one last time and pull out a small pinch. Use it to create another thin 2-inch long noodle on your tying thread. Sweep the wing material back and, as before, use the dubbing noodle to hold it there. Then, pull the remaining foam rearward and take more wraps with the dubbing noodle all the way up to behind the hook eye. Reach for your trusty whip finish tool and use it to do a 5 or 6 turn whip finish, then seat the knot well and snip or cut your tying thread free. Yes, your Chubby Chernobyl probably looks a wreck at this point, but don't worry, it'll clean up in a jiff. Pick up your tying scissors and use them to snip the midpoint of the loop on the front rubber leg material. Then, trim the excess foam off square and round its corners a bit if you like. Separate out the rear loop of rubber leg material and snip its midpoint. This should leave you with 4 legs protruding from either side of the fly. Pull back and tease out the wing material into a reasonable fan. I like to kind of round off the top edge so it looks something like this. Give the rubber legs a little tug to pull them into position, then trim them off so each is approximately a hook shank in length. The underside of a Chubby Chernobyl looks like a natural ample meal to attract fish below, while the fairly tall wings and foam body make it extremely visible to anglers above. The fly's rubber legs act as pontoons, which help it to float and add lifelike motion as well.